We are now entering the session called Equality Policies in Practice. What works? And what we've learned so far is that the paradox that this research project rests on remains. Never in history have so many young women enrolled in higher learning institutions, but still at the top, men dominate. And we're looking into all the different reasons why. And we've learned that bias in recruitment processes does not explain everything, neither does parenthood or parental leave. There are still things to be explored related to the structures and dynamics in academia that are yet to be discovered. It's complex. Now, NORDICORE has assessed the impact of equality policies already implemented in Nordic academic institutions. So that next topic is about that. We are going to ask what works. We will have 3 presentations, and we're starting with research professor at the Institute of Social Research here in Oslo. She's going to talk about national policies and gender mainstreaming in Nordic higher education. Welcome, Lisa Reisel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so one of the questions we have dealt with as part of NORDICORE has been what policies have been implemented in the Nordic region over the past 30 years and whether they actually work. And we've tried to evaluate the policies at different policy levels and with different methods. And in this part of the project, we've focused on Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And this work has been led by Charlotte Silander. She's at the Linnaeus University in Växjö, Sweden. She was unfortunately not able to be here today. And it's also been done by myself, Maria Petilä from the University of Eastern Finland, who is here today, and Ida Drange from Oslo Met, here in Oslo. And Ida will speak after me about a study we did about effects of institutional policies. But before that, I will give a short introduction to the conceptual framework that we've worked with about what equality policies are and how we expect them to work. And also say a bit about the similarities and differences in the national policies in the 3 countries that we've studied. So, what types of policies will lead to gender equality? One strategy is the strategy of inclusion through measures ensuring non-discrimination. These leave the current order and the hierarchy logics untouched, but tries to make sure that no one is unfairly treated based on gender or other characteristics. Examples are laws about transparency in hiring processes, requiring institutions to make the list of applicants available publicly and sharing the full report from the Scientific Evaluation Committee with all the shortlisted candidates. Another strategy is the strategy of reversal through measures aimed at changing value hierarchies. These provide incentives or open possibilities for upvaluing certain types of people because of characteristics such as gender in order to make change. Examples are recruitment premiums or targets or preferential treatment. And then the final strategy is organizational transformation. These types of measures aim to change the gendered structures and cultures that inform the way the organization operates. And gender mainstreaming is a strategy that arguably encompasses all of these 3 types, but ultimately the aim is to transform organizations by integrating analysis of gendered consequences into the fabric of the organization, and through this integration, transform the way the organization operates in order for all its activities to be free of gender bias and to detect and change practices that benefits one gender over others. So, we've established that there are 3 different strategies for achieving gender equality: inclusion, reversal, and organizational transformation. You can keep these in mind, I'll get back to them later. But how do policies work? What are the mechanisms that influence behaviors to make change? So we've identified 4 types of policy instruments in the Nordic national policies for equality among academic staff. The first one is hard authority instruments. Hard authority instruments are clearly sanctioned legal requirements. This means that if the law is not followed, the organization typically will face fines or have to pay reparations. The second one is soft authority instruments. These regulations are less clearly sanctioned, or rather than being restrictions, they can provide opportunities for action. For example, a law can allow an organization to earmark positions for one gender, but it's not something that any organization is required to do. And the third one is capacity building instruments. These are various types of resources provided by the government or other national entities to help achieve the desired change, for example, equality project funding. And lastly, we have incentive instruments, which are thought to stimulate the desired behavior, for example, equality awards or recruitment targets. So we've analyzed the national legislations, the policy documents and regulations in Finland, Norway, and Sweden in the 30-year period between 1990 and 2020. And we've identified measures aimed at increasing gender balance or equality in academia. And these on the left-hand side here are the measures that we've identified. It's anti-discrimination measures, transparency in hiring and promotion, the requirement of having equality plans, active duties to ensure equality in the organization, to work systematically towards that, the duty to report on these activities, and preferential treatment, recruitment premiums, equality awards, targets, and funding of gender equality projects. The plus signs under the country columns indicate that the country has or has had these measures, and the double plus sign means that it's a stronger version of that measure, and the plus sign in a parenthesis means that it's a weaker version of this type of measure. So, for example, with regard to the duty to report, this one, Norway has a double plus sign because in Norway the reporting has to be publicly available, whereas in Sweden and Finland it only has to be there has to be documentation in the organization that the government or the authorities can require upon request, but it doesn't have to be publicly available. And one reason why we put a parenthesis around the transparency in hiring and promotion in Finland here is because Finland has the possibility, or at least the possibility of direct hires of professors, the so-called calling of professors, is much more available in the Finnish legislation than in Norway and Sweden. So that's the logic of this comparison. But in general, the most striking difference across these 3 countries is that Finland has had fewer and weaker national policies for equality in academia than Norway and Sweden. So the question is, does it matter? So unfortunately, we cannot measure the effect at the national level. You'll see later that we've done it at the institutional level, but at the national level, we can't measure these effects directly. But we can look at similarities and differences in changes over time in these countries. So if you look here, the blue lines is the increase in female professors in the natural sciences between 2004 and 2018 in the 3 countries, or the blue columns rather, and the orange dots are the actual levels, and that's the right-hand axis here of the share of female professors in 2018 in the 3 countries. And so what we see here is that Finland has had a much smaller increase in this time period in female professors in the natural sciences, and which also means that by 2018, their actual level of female professors is lower than in the other Nordic countries that we've measured. And we see the same pattern in engineering and technology. So, in a way, this is an optimistic message. It seems that having national policies for gender equality in academic careers help. But if the aim is to transform these academic institutions so that their cultures and structures and the way they operate have no unfair gendered consequences, it's important to make sure that the organizational transformation measures work. And what our analysis indicates is that they may be working in spite of and not because of the way that they are regulated. So here we've sorted the measures by their degree of accountability and constraint. So on the top right, we have the inclusion measures. These are typically the hard authority instruments, clearly regulated and sanctioned. So I'm getting back to those strategies from the beginning now. And on the top right, we have the reversal measures. They are typically incentive instruments and voluntary soft authority instruments. And these are high in accountability, but largely voluntary to engage in. And then at the bottom here, we have the organizational transformation measures. These are typically low in accountability and or voluntary to engage in. So this makes the measures aimed at transformation particularly sensitive to organizational power relations and the engagement and commitment of leaders and staff. So this means that if it's true what we've seen, that the measures at the national level work or have an impact or have had it until now, we can't take for granted that they will continue to do so in the future. And this is the conclusion. There's a variety of national policies for gender equality among academic staff in higher education in the Nordic countries. Among the 3 countries we studied, Finland stands out with weaker policies in all categories. And all the 3 countries have policies for gender mainstreaming operationalized through active duties to systematically work towards gender equality in their organizations, and they have reporting duties as well as historical or current requirements to have institutional gender equality plans. However, gender mainstreaming policies aimed at organizational transformation are typically associated with low accountability, and this makes the potentially most transformative measures sensitive to organizational power relations and institutional commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. After these 3 presentations, we're going to have a panel talk again, right, with some external participants. But I would just like to say that, if you want to comment or join in that conversation, please do. Okay, next, Ida Drange, research professor at Oslo Metropolitan University. She's going to talk about what policies are implemented in Nordic universities and what policies work.
Many thanks. So this is another paper coming out of the same work package as Lisa was presenting from before. In this paper, we take as point of departure that the Nordic countries are recognized internationally for the leading work on gender equality, not only in academia. The Nordic countries are also early in adopting more specific policies for gender equality in higher education. And many organizations do an increasing amount of work to support and improve diversity in their organizations. This aside, we have limited knowledge about which institutional policy measures increase the share of women professors. But we perceive that the Nordic countries are a good laboratory to study this because we have these strong traditions of equality work. We have a large number of policies in place, and we also have access to register data. So in this study, we asked 2 questions. The first is what type of measures have been implemented at the institutional level over time. And the second is which measures are associated with an increase in the share of women professors over time. This is our analytical framework. So policies meant to combat gender inequality in organizations can be studied from several perspectives. In this study, we emphasize what measures the organizations implement to improve gender equality in their ranks. So this 4-squared table shows the 2 dimensions we use to categorize these measures. And this specific categorization is inspired by earlier work by other authors. But in the first dimension, we distinguish between policies that target individuals and those that target organizational structure. So the column entitled Individual refer to actor-oriented policies that aim to improve the careers of members of the underrepresented sex, so women mostly. Second, they include training measures for academic staff or gatekeepers, such as managers or recruitment committee members. So these are measures that aim to reduce gender-based bias and stereotyping. The second column refers to structure-oriented policies and include measures to establish organizational responsibility and those of preferential treatment. Our second analytical dimension you see in the row. It is the division between inclusion and transformation policies. A policy of inclusion entails that gender inequalities exist due to the exclusion of women in various contexts. Therefore, it seeks to include women in areas where they have been excluded. And a policy of transformation problematizes gendered structures and seeks to change individual and structures to transform organizational cultures and practices within which inequalities exist. So in summary, this gives us 4 different measures for individual inclusion, structural inclusion, individual transformation, and structural transformation. I can give you a short example of policies to each of these 4 squares. So individual inclusion measures can, for instance, be a mentoring program. A structural inclusion measure policy can be startup fund or hiring support. Awareness raising measures individual for transformation can be sexual harassment training for staff or diversity training for committees. And structural transformation measures can typically be an equality officer. We did quite a lot of data collection for this work package. We mapped the institutional policies on equality and diversity through a data-supported survey. So we designed a survey, and then we went out to the institutions and interviewed HR managers and gender equality coordinators. We did 37 institutional interviews, 14 in Sweden, 14 in Finland, and 9 in Norway. So we covered almost all of the universities in these 3 countries. The question we asked were about the type and timing of the policies they implemented, and whether they still had them in place, and if they didn't, when did they end. And then we merged this survey with administrative registers on staff in higher education institutions. We used fixed effects regression, and we lagged the effects of the policies. So we measured, if you implemented a policy 3 years ago, what is the effect today? And we added some control variables, not so very many because we didn't have so many data points, but we have a function for the year, and we also control for the number of women in lower level positions. So first, this is the results of to the first question. And this figure displays the development in policies across the 4 categories of measures. And in the analysis part, we will refer to these 4 as indexes and each policy within them as an item. And please note when you look at this picture that the y-axis have different numbers, and that is because the different indexes contain different policies. So in the maximum, you have 6 policies for career-enhancing measures, and you have 3 policies for the 2 in the bottom. And this mapping of measures reveal that the Nordic University use an increasing number of measures at the institutional level. And we also see that the changes were increasingly sought through organizational responsibility measures in the form of committees, formal grievance procedures, and diversity officer or offices. We also see a limited use of career-enhancing measures for women and preferential treatment, and this implies that either these approaches were considered to be less relevant or even perhaps more controversial to implement in a Nordic academic context. We also observe an increase in training and awareness-raising measures in this period. On average, by the end of the observation period, the universities implement 1 career-enhancing measure, 1.5 awareness-raising measure, 2 organizational responsibility measures, and half a preferential measure. And this is the second figure I will show you. And it shows the average development in percentage of female professors in the 3 Nordic countries. And this is a mathematical model, and it shows the shifts in the curve if we turn the volume knob to maximum. So what happens if a university implement all the policies that we identified? The black line shows the year trend without any institutional measures. The blue line shows what happens if you maximize the awareness-raising measures. It goes down a bit. Career-enhancing measures shifts the curve a couple of percentage points up. Preferential measure a bit more. Organizational measures on top of that again. And if you implement all of them, you will see that you get approximately a 6 percentage point increase in female professors. And this is the last figure I will show you. Because we were also curious, what is the impact of the different items, the different policy within each box? And it shows the change in female professorships associated with each item within the index, and I only show those who reached statistical significance. And each item were regressed on the share of women professors adjusted for the year function and the share of women in lower level academic positions. But we did not put all of them in the model at the same time, so it's 1 and 1 item. The items and the share of women in lower level positions were again lagged. So you can see that 2 indexes and 2 items within these display a significant increase in the number of women professors. The first is the preferential treatment index. 1 unit increase in this index is associated with a 0.797 percentage point increase in women professors. And 2 of the 3 items in this index is statistically different from 0. And that is startup funds and hiring support. So those policies have an effect. And we also see that the index for organizational responsibility measures associates with a 1.1 percentage increase in female professors. And here we observe the largest increase associated with having an equality officer, but also an equality committee. And these estimates are associated with some statistical uncertainty, and we don't show the uncertainty here. So it's important to note that even if these points is right and left for each other, the uncertainties overlap. So even though the equality officer shows the highest point estimate, we cannot say conclusively that this is stronger than any of the other measures, but they are all different from 0. For the other 2 indexes and associated items, we were not able to statistically distinguish their effect from a 0 effect. Some displayed point estimates below 0, and other displayed point estimates around 0 or just above. So, summing up. From this study, we learned that the number of measures implemented at the institutional level increases over time. University also use a combination of measures to include and transform and to improve on the individual's situation and structure. We find significant but modest effects from structural measures. Organizational responsibility measures aim to change the way an organization operates. This may indicate having an equality officer in place strengthens the effect of other institutional efforts by establishing an organizational responsibility structure and dedicating resources to oversight the implementation. Our findings are in line with other research, and the overall results indicate that the equality officers play an important role in reaching gender inequality. We also find a significant effect of the preferential treatment measures. And preferential treatment includes hiring support and funds to support women in recruitment, and hence they can improve women's position in the universities by design. Our findings also concerning the lack of effects for awareness-raising measures and training measures are in line with previous studies. And show that the ambitions to transform an organization by training or by raising awareness among teaching staff, managers, and gatekeepers necessarily do not change the structure of inequality. And it can also, as indicated by other research, and as we heard before the lunch, bias might not be the key explanation of the persistent gender gap. And I will also leave with one cautionary note, and that is that our study breaks the first ground on studying the effect of the measures at the university level. So as such, it is an important study, but it has its limitations. And further research should attempt to map the implementation of policies and associate this with changes on lower levels, such as faculties and institutions, to gain a closer view of the implemented policies and effects. Because we measure if an institution had a policy in place, but we do not measure the extent of the policy. So we do not know if they trained 5 or 50 women in their mentoring program. We also associate the measures and staff at the university levels, and the faculties can have different policies from the university. And we also observe change in professorships. And other outcome measures could include work environment factors and productivity, publications, etc. And these are the tasks that lie ahead of us to investigate the effect of policies at lower levels in the organization. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ida. Very interesting. You also had some, what I call academic tribal language going on in there. So there were certain things that I was a bit unsure of, but in the bigger picture, I see that it's saying that changing organizational structures has a larger effect than training individuals. Right. So training individuals is important, but as part of like a larger, number of measures, and maybe a prerequisite for organizational changes to work. So anyway, that was my take on it. Thank you, all of you, Lisa, Ida, and Vivian, who is now on her way. Where are you, Vivian? There you are. Yes. So, Vivian, welcome. I just want you to know that we're now, after Vivian, we're going to move into the last panel, and we're hoping that you will, use the rest of your energy to join in the discussions. Vivian, you are professor at the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies of Culture at NTNU. which in English is called
Norwegian University of Science and Technology.
Yeah, of Science and Technology,
Yeah.
exactly. And you're going to talk about gender equality policies from below. Vær så god, Vivian Anette Lagesen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that my presentation will sort of complement the other presentations in this session. Quite nice, I hope, but also some of the others. And I was thinking when I'm sitting there that I wished I had heard all the presentations before I made my presentation, but that's not the case. So my presentation will be about what is happening on the local level in terms of policies and efforts. How are they received? How are they dealt with, understood, and made sense of? And how are they implemented, if they are implemented? Because in order for policies to work, they need to be implemented at the local level. So that is what we have focused on in our project. And there are several reasons why we think this is an important level to focus upon. It is the heads of departments, the local level in academia, that are responsible for implementing gender equality policies. So what they do are quite important. But also gender balance varies substantially between local units, not just between disciplines or between research fields or between faculties, but also within faculties and also within departments in research groups. So there's a lot of local variation that is important to understand and acknowledge, and therefore policies must be locally adapted. And efforts should be tailor-made. And we also know that organizational change is more sustainable if changes are created and supported within the departments. So our goal has been to gain a better understanding of how gender balance, and we are focused on gender balance in particular, is dealt with at the departments, and also we have tried to identify ways of improving it. I will get back to that. So this presentation is based on actually a number of different studies. Oh, sorry, I haven't used this one. I used my own. Different data sets. I will draw upon some of them here now, but this presentation is not related to one specific publication or study, but a number of them that I will show in the end. I had 3 questions I will address. How did heads of departments understand and implement policies, efforts? And these are the efforts that Ida and Lisa has been talking about. How are gender equality policies and efforts reflected in stories of women professors? Do we see traces of these policies and efforts in their stories of becoming included into academia? And we have also did a study of some effects that has been quite commonly used in different universities. That was also mentioned by Ida, like funding for women to qualify for promotion, mentor programs. And this has been, at least in my university, NTNU, the standard initiatives that the budget for gender equality has mainly been spent on for the last 10 years. So if these works or not are important.
Just keep it in your hand.
Yep, good call. So the first question, how did heads of department understand and implement policy? Now, these department heads we talked to were keenly aware of their responsibility, that it was their responsibility. They felt pushed, and they were frequently told this by their superiors, the faculty and the deans. And many were quite motivated to improve gender balance, but very few had actually succeeded. And they also felt a lack of sufficient support, space, and expertise that they didn't have in order to do this work properly, and they were quite frustrated. So, conclusion, there is a significant potential in helping heads of departments in their work to improve gender balance. Because it was commonly assumed from the leadership that this was something they could just do if they decided to do so, or if they wanted to. Department heads had to negotiate many skeptical voices from above and below. There were voices from other employees. There were concerns from people who were afraid that their candidates would be bypassed. There were women who didn't want to have attention on them as gender, etc. So it was difficult. They must fulfill many goals at the same time. So it was important that they found ways to combine reaching different goals when they were trying to improve gender balance. Yeah, I'll skip a bit quicker through this. Related to what has been discussed previously in this session or the last session was how they dealt with this demand for excellence. They were expected to hire excellent candidates, and how did they approach that? Well, what we found that was excellence was not necessarily what department heads were actually looking for or thought to be or thought would benefit their departments the most. And I think this is also related to Heidi's question. So they employed different strategies to try to shift the focus away from this excellence toward the criteria of what they called suitability. And suitability referred to ability to collaborate, that the candidate was good at teaching, but mainly that they were pulling their weight in the departments. And that was the kind of persons they were looking for. And in order to do that, they employed different strategies, like instructing the committees to not rank the candidates, but rather use categories, to change the ranking of the candidates themselves when they were sending the case. So in a way, our studies show what's happening after what Julia and Marte was doing, which was basically what was happening in the scientific committees. But the process goes further. Also, after that, it has to be dealt with, and what happened there was not a focus on publications, but rather on suitability. Question 2 of gender equality policies and efforts reflected in stories of women professors. We asked them what has been the most important inclusion events that you have encountered during your careers. What made you motivated to become an academic, and what was important events? What they emphasized was support from partners and family, help and support from supervisors. They also talked about feminist and women's network that had been helpful, and encouragement from leadership, particularly department heads and colleagues, and also institutional efforts and initiatives such as funding, extra leave, and mentor programs. So if we interpret this in terms of different effective policies, we can see two types of effects, which are governance effects and governmentality effects. So the governance effects of policies are the organizational and managerial efforts, such as mentor programs, extra funding, and encouragements, etc., the ones that Ida was talking about. But the governmentality effect is interesting, because that is the effect of gender equality policies and discussion about gender equality that makes women become motivated to become academics, and also make them believe that it's possible to become academics and that they're really wanted as academics. But it's also interesting to see the governmentality effects with the surroundings of them, the partners that support them, that follows them when they get an academic position elsewhere, and other colleagues, friends, encouragement, etc. So this is the governmentality effect of policies, and which was discussed earlier. Maybe this has some kind of effect on, for instance, Arnfinn's study of how do they evaluate candidates. Right. So the effect of the institutional measures, I will just go very briefly through it. We studied these 3 different initiatives that is frequently used. We found that they had some effect, but they had some effect, but it was limited because it was unevenly used, and it was not part of a more integrated or framework of gender equality at the institution, so it became very fractioned in a way. So it has some effect, but there's also quite a lot of potential in using it better. But these were one-size-fits-all types of effects or policies, and they doesn't really fit all, and thus I would say it is quite a lot of wasted money in focusing only on them. And very briefly, it was not just the individual effect we found that it was helping the individual, but I think it's important not to think of those as binaries, because it also had a symbolic effect in showing that the institution was serious in their invitation to promote women's careers. So the conclusions, very quickly, department heads needs more help and support. Policies and efforts have positive effects, but are not used in an optimal manner, and there is much room for improvement in the work presently done to improve gender equality and gender balance on the local level. I just want a little bit of marketing. We have made a digital toolbox for helping department heads in their work, which is being presented in the webinar on Monday soon, and which is also open for everyone to use. So for all department heads and also faculty leaders can use this digital toolbox to create action plans. And it's research based, so it's based on what we are collecting a lot of initiatives and measures that we know are important. And these are the publications if you're interested to read more about it. Thank you.